it's with a sense of dismay that I rise tonight to speak on this bill, because this debate didn't need to happen. What we are seeing here really is the expression of the Abbott government's opinion that Australia was running the risk out to the year 2020 of having too much renewable energy, too much clean energy on our network, and that is an enormous problem that needs to be dealt with by bringing legislation forward. We know for an absolute fact that because they tell us, they don't even try and hide it anymore. For a little while they did, and now they've gotten so drunk on whatever it is they're up to in their party room that they just come out flat and say it, that they wanted to completely abolish the renewable energy target, just like they wanted to knock over the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, abolish ARENA, any of the key mainstays for getting this industry on its feet so that it can employ people, drive down greenhouse gas emissions and set us up for the electricity generation industry of the future. The Abbott government has been absolutely, almost forensically determined to wipe it out, and that is what brings us to this debate tonight. Can you imagine people looking back on this debate in future times, looking back and discovering a government doing everything in its power to prevent us from an oversupply of clean energy, when the rest of the world, in fits and starts, because there are people like Prime Minister Tony Abbott and all those other countries as well, in Saudi Arabia and in Canada and in other places, the United States, various sort of Tea Party operatives in the pay of fossil fuel industries, they're scattered throughout the industrialised world. But looking back in the Australian context and realising that the government had set out to prevent us from having too much clean energy. Absolutely unbelievable. Not simply indifference, but active hostility to try and bankrupt clean energy companies and throw people out of work. What it amounts to, though, when you try and work out exactly what it is that's going on here, is that the Australian electricity network is dramatically overbuilt. Apparently, we have 9,000 megawatts, 9 gigawatts of capacity that has been built that this country doesn't need. Built basically too many generators based on uncritical hallucinations about future energy demand that was just going to keep growing and growing and growing, that energy efficiency would never play a part, that home solar would never play any kind of part, that people at a household level wouldn't start getting serious about doing their bit. That's all happening. And that we would simply continue to grow forever. And so we have this extraordinary overcapacity. In WA, what it amounts to is an estimated $1 billion worth of generators that we don't need. More than $300 million spent on resurrecting the old polluting Muja coal-fired power station just outside of Collie. You might as well have just shoveled $300 million into the boiler and torched it. And this is the same Barnett government having, not entirely responsible, because some of this stuff is fairly long lead time, but presided over the destruction of the state's finances, the loss of a AAA credit rating. They're now crying poor. They've abandoned public transport projects and all sorts of other stuff because the state's finances are in ruins, having spent more than $1 billion on electricity generators that we don't need. And this is where we start to see a bit of a hint about what the Abbott government is up to. What exactly do we think is the motivation for the Abbott cabinet to be exercising such forensic hostility to try and wipe this industry out? So, for example, if you go looking for motive, you could be forgiven for not looking any further than Mr. Maurice Newman, who's the chairman of the Prime Minister's Business Advisory Council. This is not some nutcase blogger ranting on the InfoWars website. This is the guy who runs the Prime Minister's Business Advisory Council. And he says, this is not about facts or logic, it's about a new world order under control of the United Nations, that it's effectively about some kind of communist deindustrialisation of Western powers for some strange manifest agenda not ever quite spelt out. It's about a new world order under control of the United Nations. This is somebody whose advice the Prime Minister takes seriously. But I think we do need to look a little bit further than Mr. Newman. I think we could take Mr. Abbott's comments with Alan Jones on the radio the other day at face value. Other senators, for obvious reasons, have quoted him in this debate. What we did recently in the Senate was reduce Alan reduced capital, and then I guess he spelt it out. I didn't hear the interview myself, I couldn't bear it. The number of these things that we are going to get in the future now, I would frankly have liked to have reduced the number a lot more. He's talking, of course, about wind installations. And then Alan pats him on the head. Good, well, you're the boss, says Alan Jones. But we got the best deal, Mr Abbott continues, that we could out of the Senate. And if we hadn't had a deal, Alan, we would have been stuck with even more of these things. And so the renewable energy industry, in trying in good faith to negotiate with these people to get an outcome, are getting certainty. They are getting certainty, and this is why I think it's been a mistake to try and bargain for a reduction in the renewable energy target. They are getting certainty that the government is trying to wipe you out. The government is trying to put you out of business. In a Western Australian context, what that effectively means is about 1,000 jobs. And I'll put some figures to you now about how we arrived at that figure, that this government has effectively, through their renewable energy policies, in conjunction with their state Liberal and National colleagues, destroyed 1,000 jobs in Western Australia. So clap, a slow clap to you all. From a peak of under 1,500 jobs in solar and 360 in wind, we have fallen to around 730 in solar and 50 in wind in 2013-14. You destroyed 1,000 jobs in an industry that we urgently need to get on its feet, not just because of the employment potential, getting the local manufacturing sector up and running. In WA, with the departure of the mining construction boom and settling into that operations phase, people are leaving northern towns in droves, they're leaving regional areas, and sections of the West Australian economy are beginning to cave in. You would think that this government, that prides itself on its economic credentials, would be doing everything that it can to support new industries of the future. I don't know what the national figures are. Other senators will speak to those. 1,000 jobs in Western Australia that you have destroyed. Congratulations. The Climate Council has shown that over the last year, global employment in renewables grew by 13%, and in Australia, renewable energy jobs fell by roughly the same amount. And the International Energy Agency reports that renewable energy continues to rank as the fastest growing power source, and yet in 2014 investment in Australia fell by 35% overall and 88% in large-scale projects. And so this isn't just the rhetoric, the kind of unhinged rhetoric of people like Mr Morris Newman. This is actually deadly serious. This is industry policy playing out. This is very large donors in the oil, gas and coal industries who bankrolled you into office and basically bought the executive of a major political party, now carrying out their agenda, and it's sketched out in reasonable detail in the IPA's hit list of 100 things they'd like to see done to the country, carrying it out almost forensically and destroying an industry competitor. Not because renewable energy is a failure, not because it's too expensive, not because it doesn't work, but because it works too well, not just overseas, but right here in Australia. WA is the second highest greenhouse polluter per capita after the Northern Territory, and thanks to the Barnett government, when we abolished the state-based renewable energy target in 2011-12, greenhouse gas emissions in Western Australia are set to double. Double. This is over a period of time when Mr Hunt thinks he can wave his hand magically and somehow see us be brought into line with our international commitments. That was also the year, 2011, that the state government scrapped the feed-in tariff scheme for homeowners who installed solar panels. We just produced at home our second annual iteration of the Solar Postcodes report, which maps something a little bit unusual, something a little bit counterintuitive for Western Australia. It's that Western Australian households, with families around the country, want to do the right thing. They want to do the right thing for environmental reasons, but significantly for cost reasons as well. Because I guess the myth, at least from the Liberal National side of the chamber, is that clean energy and home-installed power stations, rooftop PV, is a plaything of the wealthy. But you know what? When you look at the numbers of the families and the households in Western Australia that are installing solar PV, it's inversely correlated with the median wealth of the postcode. It's low income and outer metropolitan suburbs are doing their bit, and it's the government that has actually become the block. It's not simply indifference at work here, it's hostility, and we know why, It's because it's competing a little bit too well with the people who helped put you into office. 1,000 jobs, 1,080 jobs in WA alone. And what is happening around the country is that the writing is on the wall. It's happening around the world as well, but we've seen some pretty vivid examples here in Australia in the last little while, is that coal is on its way out. It's not that it's good for humanity. You know, go to Morwell in the middle of the fire when you couldn't breathe the air and tell people how good coal is for humanity. The Greens have gone to the Victorian, the Queensland, the New South Wales state elections talking about and proposing a structured, phased closure of coal power that keeps the workforce engaged and employed through staged rehabilitation of mine sites while you can start training people and working for a transition. There's no reason at all why the sites of the coal mines and the big generators in Australia, whether it be in the Hunter, in the Latrobe or in Collie in Western Australia, can't be the site of the clean energy technologies of the future, because no one in their right mind is going to walk away from billions of dollars worth of sunk costs in transmission infrastructure in each of those three places. This is where we can be generating the renewable jobs of the future. But the government has its back turned, not through, as far as I can tell, any kind of strategic assessment of where energy reform in this country needs to go, but through simple blind pig-headedness and refusal to admit that the world has changed. Coal mines are closing anyway. In the last month and a half, we've seen Anglesey close in Victoria and Alinta's Lee Creek plants close in South Australia. Before that, it was Redbank in New South Wales. Who's it going to be next? Maybe it'll be Hazelwood. And if you don't have a transition plan for the workforce, they are thrown on the discard pile. Why is it that we are the only people talking about a structured transition for these workforces rather than abandoning them to the inevitability that the industry is on its way out? Not because of government policy, but despite it. That they are being outcompeted by electricity generators that need no fuel. And once the capital is installed, they run for virtually nothing. And that is the game changer that you appear to have failed to have understood. And so that's why we stand here tonight debating the destruction or the attempted sabotage of the clean energy sector, not through any kind of mysterious ideology, but I think through hard-headed business pragmatism of the dying industries of coal and those in the gas industry who think there's some kind of viable replacement because they're slightly less bad than coal. And who gets to be collateral damage along the way are the native forest ecosystems of this country. This is a plan that will increase logging in our native forest estate. And this is somewhere or something that I speak from direct experience in Western Australia, having been involved in the very late stages of the campaign to get the chainsaws and the bulldozers and the scrub rollers out of the old growth forests in the southwest of Western Australia. And most Western Australians thought that was kind of case closed. And good on the Gallop government, with the support of the Greens at the time in 2001, for actually bringing an end to very large-scale clear felling in the old growth forest estate, in the Karri forest and in the Jarrah forest. And then most Western Australians figured that was case closed and that the job was done. They walked away, they had a rest. People had been working on that campaign for 30 years, and they went off and they did other stuff. And in the meantime, the destruction of our native forest continued in smaller pockets, in areas arguably not considered technically old growth because they might have been logged by a handsaw 60 years ago. The destruction continued of the forest ecosystems that support the wildlife, support the rainfall patterns, and ultimately support the biodiversity that supports us and supports our economy. And this, in Western Australia, we are speaking of one of just 31 global biodiversity hotspots. The southwest forests of Western Australia are like nowhere else in the world. And we are seeing localised extinction cascades already. And it is predicted that at current rates of habitat loss, we will see Carnaby's cockatoo become extinct by 2020. And as it is in Western Australia, the current forest management plan will see the rate of logging increase, not decrease, but increase into these dying markets and these customer countries that just don't want our wood chips anymore, to an area equivalent of 10,000 Subiaco ovals every year, and an impact area of around 200 square kilometres of native forest to be hit. So no wonder people are establishing blockade camps, people are mobilising, and people are getting organised again to create some kind of defence against the insanity of industrialised logging. And just as we start to get the point where we can have an intelligent conversation about a mature transition plan, there's that word again, to a plantation logging estate, what comes along but a proposal to feed native forest logs into incinerators? This perverse redefinition of renewable energy that has fooled absolutely nobody. This has nothing to do with forest waste. Unless you are happy with the concept of 10% of mature, old carry forest being knocked over and sent off for sawlog, and the other 90% of those forest coops being fed into chip mills, pulped and burned. 90%, is that what you really consider to be waste? The forest movement, the WA Forest Alliance, I want to acknowledge their extraordinarily long-standing commitment, them and their allies, local people in the southwest towns, to the defence of the native forests of the southwest of WA, have recorded trees in excess of 300 years old, trees older than the foundation of the city of Perth, being fed into chip mills as waste and pulped. That is what we are dealing with. Trees that you can't get your arms around, trees that 5 or 6 or 7 people couldn't encircle, being classified as waste, chipped and burned. What kind of government brings forward that proposal and perversely describes it as renewable energy? This has nothing to do with waste, at least not in the sense that you mean it. It is certainly wasteful in a sense. So who, given that that is the package on the table, in their right minds, would support the Abbott government in this mad endeavour to destroy the clean energy sector just as it's starting to find its feet, and to sign off on the destruction of the native forests, not just to the southwest corner that I'm particularly attached to, but the wild forests of East Gippsland, the rainforests of Tasmania, tall forests of New South Wales. Who would throw them that lifeline? Who indeed? Enter the Australian Labor Party. And you could be forgiven from listening to some of the speeches that ALP senators have delivered tonight, heartfelt and no doubt sincere. You could be forgiven for thinking that the ALP was going to vote against this bill. But you're not. You're not. You're going to vote for it. You have thrown Prime Minister Tony Abbott a lifeline. And I can understand, having described at some length what's at stake and the consequences for a party that did everything it could to prevent the Clean Energy Act from coming into existence, from a Prime Minister who said he wished the renewable energy target had never been legislated for. They've put their cards pretty clearly on the table. They're ambiguous and confused and pretty messed up on all sorts of other things, but they are crystal clear on the subject of what they think of the clean energy sector. But what on earth has got into the Labor Party that you would throw them this lifeline? Haven't heard that from any Labor senators who've chosen to speak to this bill. We will be opposing this bill. When it gets to the committee stage, we'll see what kind of amendments are brought forward. I gather there's all sorts of churn and that amendments are still being frantically hacked. Why don't you adjourn this debate, take a very deep breath and think about what people, not future generations, because it's become very apparent that you couldn't care less, but what about the present generation of young people coming through? Kids of age 5 or 6. Try and think about how they will feel in the 2050s and 2060s and 2070s when they're our age. It's not that far away. If they pick up the transcripts from tonight's Hansard and read about the time that the Australian government, with the support of the opposition, legislated against the possibility of installing too much clean energy, there is still time for a rethink. And I really hope, for the sake of the young people in all of our lives, or those who might be following this debate from outside, that there is a rethink, that we come to our senses collectively as a legislature and do what is demanded of us. Move forward with the transition, not dig our heels in and try and cling to a past that we have well and truly outlived. It is time to move on, and protecting and extending the renewable energy target, guaranteeing the expansion of this industry and the jobs that it can provide, that's our job. That's what we should be doing in here. Not clinging on to the technologies of the past that have brought us such risk, such extraordinary present-day and near-future risk.
Thank you, Senator Ludlam.